By the middle of the 19th century, the traditional English intellectual order had fractured. The expansion of the Industrial Revolution introduced massive, churning iron gears and factory systems that reorganized human labor and community life. For candidates preparing for the state eligibility test, specifically Module 13 on Victorian prose, success depends on understanding exactly how the era's greatest thinkers reacted to this societal crisis. Look at this portrait of Charles Darwin. His biological research, along with major discoveries in geology, challenged literal interpretations of biblical time. This intellectual rupture created a profound crisis of faith among the educated classes. We see the human layer of this era in group photographs like this one. In the wake of the 1832 Reform Act, the social hierarchy was shifting. The middle class gained newly acquired economic power, but the population as a whole found itself navigating a rapidly changing world without a clear moral center. Three writers rose to address this void: Thomas Carlyle, Matthew Arnold, and John Henry Newman. They offered three mutually exclusive responses to the crisis: moralism, aestheticism, and dogmatism. As this diagram shows, all three authors share a foundation: the Victorian crisis. Mastering Module 13 requires mapping how these three radically different systems of thought were each designed to cure the exact same societal disease. This is Thomas Carlyle. Raised as a strict Scottish Calvinist, he eventually lost his orthodox religious faith. However, he retained all of Calvinism's fiery moral urgency, redirecting it towards social criticism. Carlyle diagnosed the Victorian condition as mechanism. He argued that industrialism was reducing human life, morality, and relationships to mere factory cogs and cold profit margins. In his complex 1833 work, Sartor Resartus, Carlyle proposes that all human institutions are merely clothes that eventually wear out. To survive this, an individual must navigate through the paralyzing doubt of the everlasting no and arrive at the active, affirming state of the everlasting yea. We can see Carlyle's ideal in spaces like this Gothic chapel. In his 1843 book, Past and Present, he explicitly contrasts the spiritual cohesion of the medieval monastery against the squalor and isolation of 19th century industrial capitalism. Looking at his row in our comparative matrix, Carlyle's proposed cure for mechanism is work. He preaches the gospel of work, insisting that physical and spiritual labor is the only remaining divine act capable of curing philosophical doubt. To lead this labor, Carlyle coined the term captains of industry. He demanded that factory owners stop acting like mere wage dispensers and instead become feudal-style moral leaders for their workers. On the exam, you can identify Carlyle's prose by its idiosyncratic, volcanic, and highly Germanic style. He writes with the capitalized fury of an Old Testament prophet. Carlyle's ultimate intellectual legacy is the argument that action and duty must replace paralyzed existential doubt. Next is Matthew Arnold. Pictured here, Arnold served as both a highly regarded poet and a government school inspector. This dual perspective heavily informed his views on education and the health of English society. Arnold's diagnosis of the Victorian crisis was anarchy. He feared the English tendency to do as one likes, resulting in a society lacking any guiding moral or intellectual center. In his 1865 Essays in Criticism, Arnold establishes his analytical baseline. He directs readers to maintain strict objectivity, defining the role of the critic as the effort to see the object as in itself it really is. This three-tier pyramid visualizes Arnold's central social critique from his 1869 masterpiece, Culture and Anarchy. He divides Victorian society into the aristocracy, whom he calls barbarians, the middle class, or Philistines, and the working class, the populace. His primary target is the center tier, the Philistines. Arnold uses this term specifically to describe a deeply materialistic, anti-intellectual middle class that he believed was destroying English culture through its obsession with wealth and machinery. Returning to our matrix, Arnold's cure for anarchy is culture. His goal is the pursuit of sweetness and light, a phrase he popularized to mean the combination of beauty and absolute truth. To identify this truth in literature, he proposed the touchstone method. This requires judging new poetry against isolated, supreme lines from established masters like Shakespeare and Homer. Unlike Carlyle's volcanic rage, Arnold's prose style is urbane, ironic, and classically balanced. He argues with cool detachment rather than fire. Arnold concludes that as traditional belief systems weaken, high culture and rigorous literary criticism must take the place of organized religion to serve as the moral compass of the modern world. Our third figure is John Henry Newman. This profile captures the man who shocked Victorian England. Originally a prominent Anglican priest, Newman caused a national controversy by converting to Roman Catholicism. Newman's intellectual genesis occurred here, in the academic and religious environment of Oxford. He was a driving force behind the Oxford movement, which sought to restore traditional, high church theological rigor to English worship. Newman diagnosed the era's primary disease as liberalism in religion. To Newman, this was the modern notion that religious belief is merely a matter of subjective personal opinion, rather than absolute, objective dogmatic truth. He outlined his educational countermeasure in the 1852 work, The Idea of a University. Newman argues that the cultivation of the intellect is an end unto itself. He rejects the idea that a university should prioritize utilitarian, job-focused training. His goal for a university student is the philosophical habit of mind. This is the intellectual capacity to grasp the interconnectedness of all knowledge, rather than just mastering a single specialized trade. In 1864, he published Apologia pro vita sua. This masterful spiritual autobiography traces the evolution of his religious opinions, systematically defending the logic of his conversion to a highly skeptical English public. Adding Newman to the matrix reveals his cure, dogma. In his later writing, he introduces the allitative sense, his epistemological explanation for how humans can arrive at absolute certainty in religious belief without relying on strictly mathematical proofs. Newman's prose style reflects his theology. It is graceful, rigorously logical, and rhetorically highly structured. While Carlyle and Arnold sought secular replacements to guide a changing society, Newman argued that modern civilization could only be saved by doubling down on absolute, unyielding theological dogma. Take a look at this fully populated comparative matrix. This framework summarizes the entire ideological battleground of Module 13. Carlyle demands labor. Arnold demands culture. Newman demands faith. For the exam, lock in the exact pairings between the author and the target they attacked. Carlyle targets mechanism. Arnold targets Philistinism. And Newman targets liberalism. You must also link the specific lexicon to the correct author. Gospel of Work belongs to Carlyle. Touchstones belong to Arnold. The illative sense belongs to Newman. Pay attention to the publication timeline for chronological questions. Past and Present arrives in 1843, Newman's Apologia in 1864, and Culture and Anarchy in 1869. Finally, use their distinct stylistic signatures to navigate excerpt identification questions. Look for prophetic capitalization in Carlyle, ironic detachment in Arnold, and tightly structured logic in Newman. These characteristics are essential for answering correctly. Take a screenshot of this matrix. This ideological triad, and the way their competing worldviews map onto the Victorian crisis, constitutes the core of the SET syllabus for Module 13.